council trying to develop new industries, I suppose it's very difficult for both the council and the schools and businesses. I mean, I was 16, 17, probably never been to Durham and Newcastle. It just wasn't a culture of moving out of the area, travelling. So to try and get young people to travel, just outside of the concert area to go and get employment must have been very, very difficult. And when you have a sort of a captive community that has no history, no culture of moving and travelling, I suppose they're slightly different in the Dales area and some of the more rural areas where travelling to anywhere was a necessity. I suppose the concert culture was just to stay here and have employment given to you. And I suppose that was very difficult when you're trying to create new businesses and trying to change the education system.
I think the problem wasn't a criticism of councillors, or they brought a good few consultants in, but they were quite helpful. I think the employees of the council had nothing to do for years. As Joe said, Consulting Company brought all the money in, the council ran domestic housing, etc. We're trying to talk to somebody within the council to get a business, an embryo business up and running. Yeah, we'll be back in 6 months to you. The people had a different. The people who work in the council, in the awful word, were pen pushers, and that had been consultants in from British Steel Industry and from banks and from employment companies, and they were the people who pushed. Because council workers, unfortunately, the way they work is, we'll do that next week, or we'll do it next month. When we were looking for new jobs or new employment, you wanted to start tomorrow. And that is when you had to be bullish, in fact. You had to almost threaten them with moving out of the area to generate some enthusiasm, because they had a nice job behind the desk. They weren't wanting to phone around for grants and have hassle, as Joe knows. And that's probably the problem. It wasn't the actual setup, it was just the culture of the people. It never had this come on them. It was ingrained in them, and all of a sudden this was a new big thing. As Joe said, there was a lot of companies. I mean, we used to go to seminars, and there would be a room full of people all wanting to start their own businesses. And they had to sort the chaff from the wheat, because there was some really harebrained schemes went through Concert Council at the time. And the good ones came to the top and provided a lot of employment. And as Joe said, number one industrial estate wasn't there in 1978, 79, where we worked. I mean, they built 2 factories for us. I mean, nobody else, they're still there. They were not purpose-built, but the main structure's still there of them 2 factories. I mean, there was a dairy, wasn't it, Joe? There was a little dairy set up, diversification. But the people in the council couldn't handle that at the rate we wanted to handle it.
I think the councils, both district and county, have had a lot of stick over many years, but looking back, I think they were given, and given the education where I've been to now, I think they were given an impossible task. They were given a task of regenerating an area, a sizable area, which had never been done in that kind of locality before. They were given very little tools and skills and expertise to do that with. They were just given the knowledge that they had in the past running the old system, and then told suddenly to try and run this brand new multi-industry regeneration system. And I think whoever had been in that council for those first 5 or even 10 years would have done a similar job to what we got. That's not saying there was any, there should be some criticism for some of the things that were done then, but I think it was a thankless task looking back that they were given to be sort of put in that position over a very short period of time, and then given this massive project to manage, and perhaps with some ill-advised consultants and outside expertise that came in. When there's money on the table, I think you get sort of, as you said, some wheat and some chaff.
I think the government used this as a guinea pig, because I think after us there was other places was decimated as well, didn't there?
Yeah,
and I think our model that we had was just sort of, ad hoc. We were just trying to develop things as we the best we could. But I think these other places that actually were decimated, as I use the word, they had more insight of how to tackle it because of what happened at Concert. Yeah. So as I said, we were really the guinea pigs, and we suffered a lot because of that.
But we also had an industrial development officer who was actually worked quite hard, and was very successful to bring some industry into the area. But at that time, you had English estates. They were the ones who managed the finances, and they were the ones who give the grants. And you had to convince the English estates at that time to give you the funding. It wasn't just the council. there was outside organisations and other sort of developers which were going not just through.
But this plan was established by the Conservative government. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it was the English estates, and they controlled their finances, and every grant had to go through them. So you weren't just going through one hoop as a local authority. You were having to go through two hoops, and maybe 3 or 4 to go into get partnerships, matching funding, raising money from other sources, robbing Peter to pay Paul. It wasn't just like, oh, you're doing nothing. The officers at the council at the time were working very, very hard to try and maximise the resources they had to suit the needs of the community at the time. And
it'd be true to say that we had no model to copy. We were really making our own model as we went along, weren't we?
we were, because they also had the same problem down in South Wales when it closed Corby.
Down there originally.
Yeah, it did. He had Llanwellyn,
Yeah.
Corby, everything like that. So you were going down and asking how they got over their problems to actually we could build on what they learnt for our future in this area. So it was a lot of striving, a lot of struggling to actually try and bring. We were successful in some places, we weren't unsuccessful at others.
You've got to realise how many, like, as you say, Corby, this, that, the firms that shut down this area in the early 80s, those railroads went, Clark Chapman's was cut into, Vickers Armstrong, I mean, it's gone now.
Balls.
You've got all Ransom and Marls, that was the first one. That was the second biggest employer in Derwentsside. You had the company, then Ransom and Marls, they're all shut. And saying, but you've got this happening throughout the country. Now they're all competing for these factories. You know, these estates. Oh, it should be wonderful. You read in the paper, oh, we're going to build a brand new industrial estate. It'll employ 60,000 people. And I'm thinking, and where they're coming from? Who's the firms you're going to get in? They're just saying, oh, there's a state, they're going to flock in and just ask for it. No, as you say, you had to pull them in. You know, lasso them and pull them in to get them to set up.
But the other thing that was happening is people couldn't get the jobs locally. They were having to travel to Newcastle, Sunderland, Durham. But when they were going there, it was actually having an impact on the town centres, because rather than shop in concert when they were at work, they would stop in Newcastle and spend the money in Newcastle, spend the money in Durham. And it drove the local economy down. And you can see now where the town centre is now, we have a lot of charity shops, and we're still struggling to bring good quality shops into the concert in the Derwentsside area. It has an impact on Stanley, Lanchester. It's not just Concert Town Centre. You know, there was a lot of other communities, villages have been, well, lost a lot of the amenities because people are not spending the money where they live. They're spying outside.
Yeah, you know, I could talk about Jarrow and Hebburn, and to that side of the river, you know, I've said before, the 83 there was no shipbuilding on the south side of the river. The same thing in Walker. You go past Walker now. I was down there recently talking to some kids in a library that didn't even know that the shipyard was there, and it's literally like from here to the end of the park. And it's the same now with kids today, isn't it? They don't know this steelworks thing. They can't begin to understand what it is and the impact of it. I suppose what you're saying, Joe, in a sense, is it's saying it's sometimes easy to simplify the problems, but the problems, in fact, are much more complex than that. And that, you know, lots of people were competing because of Germany didn't deindustrialise. It's still got its engineering base, and that's why it's relatively successful, even though it's flattening out a bit. You know, whereas we did, the British economy began to deindustrialise from the back end of the 70s.
But at the time, we were a member of the AUC, and the AUC was the main problem, because they were determining the steel levels that would be produced. They said there should be a reduction in the British economy in France, Italy, and Germany. And the government at the time kowtowed, and we did reduce the production of steel in this country. Hence, when we built the bus station in Concert, we got a lot of ridicule. Where did the steel... Pardon? The bull ring. the bull ring, and that was before my time as well. But
I bet you were glad.
they didn't even use steel. They brought Italian steel to build the bus station in Consett, which was an insult to the British steel workers. And a lot of people were resentful. And at the time, the Downside Council at the time did get a lot of, well, I would put it mildly, that was the nice way of putting it, but there was a lot of people resenting, why are you using Italian steel to build a bus station?
Well, mills down the road.
Well, we got them down the road.
What was the answer?
What?
What was the answer?
It wasn't because of resources, it was the cost.
I think one of the criticisms, I mean, there's been a lot of good work done, and I think we've got to be honest about that. A lot of good work done by a lot of different organisations and councils, etc. But one of the biggest criticisms, I think, is why it took 30 years to develop the Genesis site.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the biggest criticism. Now, there may be reasons for that, I don't know. But from the ordinary person who doesn't know the ins and outs, you know, why did it take 30 years to develop that site?
Well, if you go back to 81, the council sent a little pamphlet out, what they proposed to do with the site down there. There was pockets of housing, small industrial estates. Hounsgill was football fields. Because I've still got the magazine in the house, and it says, ask for your comments and that, and send it back to the council. And as you said, you waited and waited and waited, and nothing happened. I don't know if it was a matter of getting funding for it or what. But
It's a ready-made answer.
Well, I've already answered. We did have a company that was going to actually start and build airbags on the steelworks site, and that was going to be the hub of setting and expanding it out from there. One of the first things that we did come out along with, and at the time, was using it as a ski slope, sailing ponds.
yes, that was all in that
that was all horse riding, cycle tracks. But
In the early 80s, there was a meeting at the Raven Hotel, which is no longer there now, full to the gunnels the room. There were some consultants come and give us a speech about what they were going to do with the company site. As Joe said, ski slopes, a small wind generation part,
that was going to be
in fishing ponds.
Yeah.
There was an old chap stood up and he said, fishing ponds. And Joe said this about contamination. And he said, is it night fishing? And this consultant said, what do you mean night fishing? He says, well, they'll glow when you take them out of their sun. And that was about 1981, 1982, and that was the first plans I heard for the steelworks site, which never ever got off the drawing board.